Okay, imagine. So now we're going to talk about modelling humans. And agent-based models are one way of modelling humans. So if we suddenly get overwhelmed by the desire to run off to the beach early, the take-home message of all of this is that the same logic that you use in modelling any other part of the system, you use when you're modelling humans. We're not that special, actually. Advertising would not work if we were not able to be modelled. People can tell what we're going to make a decision on, and that's why advertising works. So how do you know when to use an agent-based model? So an agent-based model is when you use a set of decision criteria to dictate the behaviour, what's happening in the model, instead of a differential equation or a statistical equation. Okay? So it's a bit like a first-person shooter. It's a video game, effectively. So it's a decision tree that they follow, and I'll get into this in a bit more. But how do you decide which model to use when? So analytical models, differential equation models, analytical solutions work for one or two bodies. So the three-body problem has been a problem in mathematics for a very long time. At the other extreme, you have statistical models and differential equation models where there's so many individuals and the law of large numbers and central limit theorem and all those other things that mean at large numbers you can make simplifying assumptions kick in. So when there's tens of thousands of individuals involved, those models work really well. There's this messy bit in the middle where traditional forms of mathematics don't cope. And that's where agent-based models really come into their own as being a useful approach. So you can also have hybrid models where you stitch the different parts together. To work. Management happens to work across all of those scales, and so that's why hybrid models are a good approach, because there's some parts of the question where classical approaches do work, some parts of the question where it's purely an analytical solution to work, but there's other parts where you're in that fuzzy spot in between. So piecing them all together is a good way to do it. So agent-based models work when the behaviour is a really important part. So that could be a biological behaviour, it could be a human behaviour, it could even be a physical property. So you can have an agent-based models of packets of water moving around in Lagrangian space. It doesn't always have to be about humans. It's just that it's most often used when we think about humans. So each agent has to have, each individual has to have its own characteristics, its own set of information, and doesn't have perfect information about what's happening around it. So it's responding based on a limited set of information. So it has how it perceives its environment and what it knows from inside. There's also allowed behaviours that it can follow. So it's not that it's super complicated, there's usually a set of simple rules. It's how the combination of stimuli and rules together come together to produce behaviour. So this is actually an example from a fish model. So some of these arrows haven't turned up, it turns out, but they're pretty much when the agent starts each time step it says, am I alive? If yes, then go off and see how big the group size is, whether I'm about to be eaten, am I running away, am I searching for food myself, am I in a good habitat, do I want to just wander around aimlessly trying to find a better place to live, have I got a partner, should I be dying or growing or spawning, if I'm dead, I need to decompose. So that there's some simple rules that it actually follows. So the way that it works is there's an environment, there's the agents that live in that environment, there's features of the environment that they like or don't like, and then there's objects as well in that system that they respond to. So you can have agent-agent interactions with each other, you can have agent-environment interactions where they're looking at whether the environment's suitable or desirable. And you can also have agent-object interactions, where it's some feature of the world that they live in that's not inherently a part of the natural environment, but it's something else that they respond to. Okay, so each agent has its internal state, so these are different agents. So each one has its internal state. So if we get back to my desire to eat ice cream, for instance. Am I hungry? Have I got this internal desire to have ice cream? We can always pretty much set that to yes. What's my perception? Is it socially allowable to go for ice cream for breakfast? In my case, yes, but my mother would say no. So it's the perception, am I near my mother? No. Okay, I might get away with this. Then it's the level of communication. Can I communicate my desire to my co-friends who have this stupid obsession with coffee instead of ice cream? And can I convince them that we need to go for ice cream in the morning instead of coffee?
Yes.
And then what kind of actions and reception can we get? Can we get the desired outcome? So that's how we respond. So it's a set of very simple rules about trying to balance the internal information that we have with regard to the actions that it can take. So an example of this would be if you've got an environment with the agents in the environment, if those agents can interact, based on the results of those interactions, you get some outcomes and some organisations coming along, and there can be some simple rules dictating planning and the rules that they follow and how those rules might change under certain interactions. It all seems a little bit abstract in this example, but not if we turn it into a soccer game. So given we're in Brazil, we'll make it a soccer game. So your environment is the field, your agents are the players, they have some basic rules. Let's just put the offside rule to the side for a moment, that's way too complicated. But if we just have some basic rules about passing the ball, like touch it with your hands unless you're the goalie, some of those very simple rules. The players can follow those rules, they can pass the ball to each other, and what you get as an emergent property of those agent interactions is a game of soccer. And so the coach is trying to give you advice about what to do under those situations, which is a slight modification of the rules or a slight change of perception that the agent has. But it's basically a simple set of rules that gets a dynamic outcome. So some examples of these kinds of models from history. The model of life is probably the simplest. It's basically how patterns propagate across an area. It was originally about how life might spread. It basically just looks at the probability of inhabiting another cell based on what's happening around you. Will you spread? So what's the chance that any one cell will go extinct? What's the chance that it will spread to the next spot based on who's around it? So does it have something on either side? Does it have a place to go? Does it have something it can interact with to get a spread? And these kinds of patterns, it's a very simple rule. It's about 3 lines of code to get this to work. And what they use it for is it can track the spread of a heart attack across the muscle of the heart. It can look at how the neurons grow in your brain. It looks at how the oxygen and other nutrients go across the leaves of a plant. It can mimic the creation of camouflage patterns in natural animals. It's used in cryptography to break down code, so when hackers attack a cyber site, they're often using these very simple kinds of artificial intelligence, artificial neural networks, using a variant of this kind of model to break the encryption, or on the flip side, to create the encryption in the first place. So these very simple rules can come to very complex outcomes. The next one is the information sharing or networks. So this can be a neural network, it can be information, it can be gossip. How does gossip spread through a class? How do we share information? So the place that this has been really useful in looking at climate change questions is how do we get a spread of behaviour or innovation to go across the community so that you can look at these kinds of ideas. So what kind of nudges do you need to put in place, or what kind of facilitation do you need to put in place to let that idea propagate across the network? This is where I try to get a bit interactive so that we're invariably get involved. Come on, catch up. So NetLogo is a program that's really available on the internet. It comes with a whole bunch of existing models already. So if we come down to, this is an example about viruses on a network. So it's of course it puts the virus down in the corner that you can't see. So what this is doing is tracking just a very simple spread of virus on a network. So how immune are things, how long does it take to become active, how easy is it to spread, and you can pull those sliders backwards and forwards to understand how this virus spread. It's a very simple set of code behind this. The beauty of NetLogo is that you can create this interface in about 2 minutes flat, and the code behind it is actually all of that is less than a page of code has given you all of this outcome. So you can explore very quickly how those kind of information can spread. So other examples include Is it going to work? So other examples, actually one last one, is this kind of model is exactly how they figured out obesity is actually a disease that has some kind of actually transmission behind it. So for a long time it was considered just to be only poor eating, and now they've realised it's in effect a real disease, and that's a way of attacking it and treating it because it's to do with the microflora in the gut. So other things to do that they do with it is a lot of natural resource management around forestries and fires, but also around traffic. So Ingrid and I live in a place where if the managers had just taken 5 minutes to play with an agent-based model, we would have a lot less traffic jams every day. So you can use these kinds of models are actually used to look at the movement of traffic around. This is a very simple one, obviously. The model is all in the grid. But you can look at how the placement of traffic lights and traffic obstacles can change the flow of traffic and make it easier or harder. A lot of the use of traffic lights these days has come down to these kind of models sitting in the background, dictating how they change dynamically traffic flow in places like New York. The other thing that you can do with these kinds of models is actually to understand traffic flow in the first place. So a lot of traffic jams happen for very simple reasons. There is no actual obstacle. It's just that someone accidentally touched the brakes or got a little bit slow because they were listening to the music. And so that then creates waves of backup. So with these kinds of models, you can look at how those kinds of traffic problems can occur and understand how you can, some of them are just not avoidable at all, but in other spots, how changing the shape of the road can actually help avoid it. So ironically, putting a bend in a road is the best way of, on really long highways, of stopping traffic accidents, because it makes the brain re-engage with what it's doing instead of just being in auto on a big straight road and don't have to think. Putting these kinds of variations of the road can reduce accidents and reduce traffic problems. They also work well with GIS, so there's kind of spatial data that we'll talk about later in the week, but also even the kind of spatial data we just heard about then can be automatically loaded into these models to help basically do the information content, and you have your agents respond to that real world patterns. So they've been used, for example, to help neighbourhood planning and understanding where people live. I'll get to another example of that in a minute, but perhaps some of the best known models are around the way that it looks at the interaction of herd behaviour and human behaviour, which is now used a lot in basically movies. So if we think of the movie Nemo, it used buoys not just to do the fish movement in Nemo, but also even to do how water moves across the way that this works is, you want to increase the flow of that. So it starts off a bit randomly initially, but soon with very, very simple rules about just following what your neighbour is doing and having a little bit of a look ahead to where you're heading, you start to see formations of like birds form. And so that kind of stuff is how they've started to understand the movement of fish, the movement of birds, but also the movement of crowds, so that they'll model a crowd in a stadium to understand how it might break down if there's some catastrophe happens, how people might evacuate. I can guarantee you it's being used in all the major cities of the world to understand how people will respond to a terrorist attack. Will they run to it? Will they run away from it? Where will be the choke points where people will get trampled? These kinds of models are being now used to understand planning permissions and planning equations in situations where people act very much more like a fluid than they do like the kind of individual that we see on a day-to-day basis, or we think in ourselves. originally used in the 1940s to think about hearts, and actually a bit in military training and military development. They've been actually proposed now as one of the major ways of thinking about the whole universe. I'm not sure I'd go as far as Wolfram on that kind of stuff, but they are really useful for thinking about some human interactions. So there was a guy called Schelling back in the 1970s, and he was trying to get across to the general public in the US that the racial distinctions that they saw in neighbourhoods wasn't because white people hated black people. It was because there's a very fundamental desire in humans called a confirmation bias, which Ingrid will touch on later in the week. We want to feel security by being around people that think like us or act like us. It's the herd mentality that humans have, that we judge by our neighbours what our standards are. So you don't have to hate anybody else, you just have to like yourself enough to want to be around people like you, right? So an example of this that's actually a pretty cool online game to take kids to the my house. Okay, this is where we see how many people are in the room. Okay, so this is the parables of the polygons, as they call it. So the whole idea is that there's happy polygons and there's unhappy polygons. The triangles don't hate the squares, if we can get it to actually... Triangles don't hate the squares. They just want to live next to another triangle. So you can see where triangles are together, they're happy, or actually, and a bit sad and rocking where they're not next to another triangle. And similarly for the squares. So they don't hate the other state, they just like to live next to their own. So they'll move around. And pretty quickly you find that you've got spatial segregation set up. It was just because they wanted to live next to a triangle that looked like them. So this helped people understand that it wasn't about fundamental hatred, it was actually just about trying to be with people like yourself. So you can also then encourage diversity and understand conditions where that will change. It's a bit hard because of the resolution here, but I would encourage people to get on and play with this kind of game to see the kinds of patterns that you get and what kind of intervention and tolerance levels you need to see this kind of patterning break down. Which is exactly what a guy called Hammond started to do in understanding the way that society works. So he took that very simple set of rules and he started to look at corruption. So what produces a polite society? So you have people who just want to do their day-to-day things. Occasionally some of that's not completely legal. So how do we get maximisation of people being honest versus corrupt, which is a big issue in some parts of the world. So you wanted to know what levels of compliance were required or what levels of enforcement before you saw a compliant population. So in this case, this is how it started. You had the odd honest person, the blue line, and the rest of the world was largely corrupt. So you would think in that situation that the world would end up mostly corrupt forever. So this is time going south. So the red ones are the people who got caught and were jailed. And as soon as you could start to actually be consistent in the way that you enforced the law, within one generation the world had become honest. So it was just that it was the level of enforcement, it was the level of compliance. It wasn't that the rules governing your behaviour had changed. It was just that it was easier to do easier to conform, easier to... People are pretty simple, okay? They do the easiest thing possible. If it's going to be a little bit tough, we're not going to bother. So if you want to get people to donate their organs, you make it automatically that everybody donates their organs and has to opt out not to donate. The majority of people then donate. If you make it the opposite, you have to opt in to donate, they don't bother. So all this is I am going to not have to worry about getting jailed and penalised if I bother doing the right thing. It's not enough of a payoff to be corrupt, so I'll just be honest. It's pretty much how the Western world works, to be honest. There's corrupt people out there, there's some psychopaths out there. Most of us are like, oh, it's just easier to do all the time. The same thing is true when you start to look at some of the other aspects of society. So they've looked at equality, so how resource use and pollution in these artificial societies, how they spread, what kind of rules can help sustainability. And some of the most telling ones have been actually used in the context of the UN to understand things like genocide. So what drives genocide? Is it again something that's about hate, or is it some simpler rules that see very perverse outcomes? So for an example, to model the Balkans, they just looked at level of inter-ethnic hostility, and it only had to be fairly low. It was a fairly low percentage, less than 5% of the population. Discontent with the area of interest and your fear of what happens if you get caught. So as soon as your discontent rises, so your fear of arrest has dropped, ethnic hostility slides up, and you go from a place where you're all rather okay interacting, you get that disaggregation we showed before in the polygons. As that continues, you start to see enclaves form, and ultimately those enclaves are destroyed. It's again only 4 equations that you need to be able to produce this behaviour. It's all about the interactions of perceptions and your chance of having a perverse outcome on the end. So this kind of approach has now been used to think about ancient civilizations like the Maya and how they fell, and the Anasazi Indians in the northeast, the north-south, the west of the United States. In both of those cases, it looks like it was a very simple interaction of their social cultural image of themselves and the environmental impact that they had led to ultimately to the collapse of those civilizations. So the IHOPE project, based in Sweden but is an international collaboration around the world, is using these models and the lessons from those past societies to understand how you might get sustainable outcomes today. So when you're building one of these models, the kinds of things it can deal with are decisions to act, so assessing a set of circumstances, deciding how to respond to those circumstances, and then the individual actions and how they might be expressed as collective outcomes. It's really good at looking at norms and rules and all the kind of taboo things that Ingrid will cover later in the week, but it's not good at metaphysics. It's not trying to replicate exactly what's happening in the head. It's just following some of the simple rules. So it's one of those subgrid scale processes that I was talking about before. We're not trying to exactly monitor what's happening in someone's head. We're just trying to capture how that expresses itself as general rules. So taking that kind of approach, this is Beth's version of how the human mind works. Okay? So fundamentally, there are some needs that we all have to have delivered. So we get tired, we get hungry, we want to feel secure. So that's the basic human needs. We all have those needs. Then there's some contextual needs. So in my case, I must have ice cream. We've already established that. I actually also want my kids to be happy and all of those kind of things. So there's some personal contextual needs. And then there's some uncontrollable impacts. So if we think about our trip to Brazil, in the case of Lisa, she wanted to be fed and she wanted to be safe on her way here. She wanted to make sure all you guys are happy. The uncontrollable things that happened was like the Delta strike. She couldn't do much about that. That was a bit beyond us. So the same thing happens to us. On a day-to-day basis, I want to be secure and fed. I want to keep my family happy, but I can't do anything about a volcano going off in Indonesia. I have to respond to the way that changes my world, but there's nothing I can directly do about it. That combination of things builds up my experience and response. So if you take that view of the way that humans work, you can't get human weather. I can't predict what any one of you will do in any one exact minute. But we can do human climate. We can say this kind of person responds in this kind of way. We get those classes of behaviour right, and so that means that we can model the humans just as well as we model the biophysical side of the world. So the usefulness of these kinds of models is to look at some of the questions I've already shown you, but it's also to create a virtual laboratory so that you can explore responses. So there's 2 ways of modelling humans. One is to just completely take the human out of the situation and have them all in the model, just like you have all of the physics and all of the biology. The other way is to create the model as an experimental field for the people to play around in. So we call them wetware, it's such a loving term. But you create some artificial intelligences to be other actors in the model, you create the environment, and then you put real people in and see how they respond to that. And that's effectively what all those big online games are that make people really richly good. They're just these kind of games. So one of the best examples was they accidentally introduced a bug into a game called World of Warcraft. And if you went to that particular place on the map, your character got infected and effectively ended up dying. The response of the game players mimicked the spread of pathogens and epidemics in the real world in a way we've never ever been able to with differential equation models or other models. So just watching the people respond, so some people purposely went and had a look and then tried to infect other people. Other people were created closed cities. No, you can't come in here, we don't want the bug coming into our part of the world. Other people tried to run away from it, so they responded in all the same ways that we see in the real world to a make-believe situation. So it is a place we get so caught up in interacting with these models that you can explore behaviours you can't record in any other way. You can also look at the social dimensions of things, such as how trust and risk and attitudes and learning can modify behaviour, which is a great way of understanding and finding different solutions. So for instance, this is an example from Vietnam where they had to negotiate over the water and what was happening upstream. So they had their own requirement for water, then they had to negotiate, and there were cycles of negotiation around can I borrow water from your allocation, what's it going to cost me, and that was being conditioned on what was happening to them. So the individual negotiators had to know whether it was the wet season or the dry season, what kind of available information they had, whether they had off-farm or on-farm options. So it was about trying to find interactions, and it can build up. So the most common way that this is currently being used now is quite seriously in modelling insurgencies around the world. It was used extensively in Afghanistan and Iraq to understand the tribal interactions happening there and the laying of IEDs. You can actually see in the model that the IED placement changed in exactly the same way that it ended up doing in the war itself. And the way that these models work is that they have kinships and other time things that define them, but they respond to the stimulus, they have their perception of the situation, they have their cultural rules, they have a memory of what's happened to them before, and then they go back up the decision-making side to have their response. So then you have two different tribes in place, or the government versus the insurgents. It plays out over the grid space, and you can then you can look at the way that insurgency grows and how that spreads in the Civil War kind of time step over a few different generations even, and you can actually see these kinds of things play out on maps. Unfortunately, I can't show you some of those maps, they're highly classified, but it's the same kind of maths that we are going to play with in NetLogo if we choose to do that kind of stuff. So it is a really good way of capturing the bigger parts of being human. So the psychology inside your head is probably some of the best and simple rules that you can put into a model, and then it can span the same kind of things that Ingrid will talk to as well as what Rashid does. So some parts of economic interactions are pretty straightforward and others get complicated in ways that Ingrid will cover later in the book. But it can all be captured mathematically in these kinds of equations. So humans aren't some